Ciao a tutti, it's Aureo, got a tripod, and today I wanted to talk about the three most important cards in hot format. The three biggest staples. At least, like, if you've seen the stats for the latest format library tournament, these were pretty much tied for the most played main deck cards in the format. And well, if we're not accounting for limited cards, but like obviously if a card is limited, you're less likely to see it, so it's less important. Especially since we don't have a storm which just warps the format around it. So yeah, it's Maxi, Soul Charge, and Breakthrough Skill, and I wanted to talk really in depth about them. So starting off with Maxi. It might be a bit of a fad, main decking Maxi, for like it's always been a must side three copies until somewhat recently, where it's been more and more of a main deck staple, where most decks main two or three copies, usually three copies of Maxi. And the main reason for that is that like unless you're playing versus spellbooks, it's always live, and if you're playing versus everything besides like Georgias, it's still better upstart. And even versus Georgias, it's still upstart and not that much worse. So it's a very strong card for any deck that wants more consistency, pretty much, which is most decks. Which is the main reason you play too. Where you use it depends. For example, versus we'll go a bit over every matchup one by one. Versus Cat, well, if you change it to Sanctum, they will not go into Big Attack, which means they will not go into play this unless they go with like Call of the Hunted, a second Moral Attack later. And if you hit their Ignition into Big Attack, well, if you change it to Big Attack's effect to special summon itself from the graveyard, you get a draw too. So that's nice. Not as nice as preventing play this usually, but still, it's still a draw too. Versus Gilgaz, kind of depends. Like if the search Axel, you might want to use it. If they special summon Axel, you might want to use it. It's very strong, obviously. Well, it's obviously gonna trade if they have Arsenal. And if they have Girgia gear, you want to wait until their turn. So you use Maxi in the standby phase, and then they're kind of forced to go like Girgigan Tex, search armor, set armor pass, or just make one rank 4 and pass. So that's good. Versus Mermal, you chain it to usually Beastsphere because that's sort of it's a draw 2 every time. And besides that, you can chain that to Tejas. So you get at least a draw 1 and you stop them from potentially going off. It's obviously GG versus Infernity, versus Sylvans, Nimble Mermel. It's kind of decent versus Girgia Karakuri. Depends on how good the build is, because I feel like better builds of Girgia Karakuri are a bit weaker to Maxi because they aren't as OTK focused. Like builds with few synchros, floodgates in the main deck, or soul charges in the main deck, going into Felgrand. Those I would say are the better Georgia Karakuri builds. I will update my list that I profiled at some point because I've been playing Georgia Karakuri for a bit, and I'm waiting when I top with it. Then we have it's very strong versus Madolce. If you change it to Angeli, it's obviously very strong because they're kind of forced to either do a very subpar play or give you 2 cards. If you change it to Mewfuil, they are mega fucked, but that goes for anything with Mewfuil. Then we have well, about Maxi, like late game, it's not as good because like they might just be able to OTK you that turn. So then versus Constellars, you usually use it versus artifacts Otherwise, you use it versus LGAD. Obviously, like it's usually unless you bricked, it's not worth it to use it on Pollux into something else, into a rank next to Z, because it's just a draw 1 when the deck can easily give you a draw 2 later down the line. Depends on how bad your opening hand is. Then we have, it's obviously very dead versus spellbooks. It's very strong versus Mythic Rulers, but they can definitely play around it better than, Infernity and Sylvans can. It's actually kind of bad versus Lightsworn Ruler, in my opinion, because usually if they are gonna special summon a lot during a turn, they're gonna kill you. So it's good versus their Soul Charge turns, but it's not good versus their Judgment Dragon turns. Hieratic Ruler, it's good, definitely very good. Versus Chaos Throne, it's pretty good. You can imagine versus what decks it's best at, and versus what decks it's just okay. And one of the strengths of spellbooks in this current meta is that Maxi is very dead versus them. It's like, well, at least you trade it 1-for-1 versus Temperance, but like usually if they have High Priestess, they are often just gonna kill you very soon. So when they summon it, so yeah. But I'm pretty sure you can chain it to spellbook to Priestess effect and get a draw 1 at least. And obviously you can use it on life, but when does that happen? But yeah, besides that, like if you can't afford the main deck space for it, you still absolutely do have to side deck the card, which is kind of a shame because like it's the closest thing to an absolute staple in the format. That and DD Crow, because like you have to side them, but Maxi is kind of expensive. It's like $10 at the cheapest for a common. So yeah, that's kind of the main barrier to entry to hot format, especially now that we got the artifact trap we got the trap trick structure deck, which reprinted the artifacts. That's very good. Gives you a good hot base stuff to start with. So yeah. Then we have the big power card of the format, Soul Charge. There's okay, so pretty much how many copies of Soul Charge you run depends on your deck, and I'll like give you some tips. If your deck cannot fulfill it or has a searchable version of it, it doesn't need Soul Charge. So like Bujin has a searchable Soul Charge, so it doesn't usually run it. Madolches go back to the deck, so they usually don't run Soul Charge. Spellbooks, they obviously don't run Soul Charge. Spirits, the spirits cannot be special summoned, so you cannot run Soul Charge. And that's about it. Then we have like, if you want to run one copy of the card, it has to be a deck that deck thins a lot and that doesn't really care much for Soul Charge as a main game plan. It's just a backup plan. So deck like Ghost Trick Artifacts can run one Soul Charge. Cyber Dragon Artifacts, in my opinion, one Soul Charge is best. Those decks deck thin like crazy. So even if you're losing, then you have decks that don't live and die by Soul Charge. In those decks you play too, because like it's definitely a good card to see. It's but it can be bricky if you play it at 3 and you don't draw a decent hand, at least a playable hand. But if you draw a subpar hand, it can save you down the road. So there's that. And then obviously you have decks that play 3, combo decks mainly. Also decks that set up the grave a lot and have a lot of grind game and are pretty consistent. So for example, like Gadgets and Heraldics, those kinds of decks. Then there's a couple of decks that you can play 2, you can play 3. There's like Mermels, Mythic Rulers. Those decks can do big combo plays with them, but Usually playing conservative with them is better, so the third Soul Charge can be a bit weaker with that. And especially with Mythic Rulers, it's a bit of a deep draw deck, so if you run a lot of draw cards, if you run like Consonance, Upstart, Trading, you also want to play like fucking One Day of Peace, you're on Card Trooper, all that shit, maybe you can cut the third Soul Charge. Besides that, one interesting deck with Soul Charge is like Giga Karakuri, because in my opinion, like if you think of Giga Karakuri as like an OTK deck, you don't play Soul Charge, and in my opinion, that's not how you should play Giga Karakuri. You should think of it like Georgia, but that can make aggressive plays, and with the Karakuris, your Soul Charge is even more powerful than in pure Georgias. And my god, I've been saying this for like a month now. There is no more infuriating card than Georgia's Soul Charge. Like, you finally whittled all their resources down. You're down to like a couple of things. You don't really have much, because like you finally got rid of all their resources, and then they use Soul Charge, and that's GG. That's mainly if you're playing like a control deck, not so much a deck with big beaters that can just beat over the Gyugyas. So, well, that's not usually what I play. So, yeah, that's not fun. Gyugyas should not be allowed to play fucking Soul Charge. Yeah, but yeah, it does bring some interesting stuff, like. For example, like versus Mythic Rulers and other decks that have a lot of Soul Charges, powerful Soul Charge plays, you often just want to save the Solemn Warning for the Soul Charge. So that's something a good player should do. Especially if it's kinda telegraphed. Then, what else can I say? Torrential, very strong versus it. Bottomless, also very strong versus it in the right matchups. A tip about using Soul Charge in the format is keeping in mind that the opponent might have a bottomless set. So there's that. Don't forget to pay the life points, because since you pay it after resolution, often if the opponent has like a response and you have a response, and by the end of things, sometimes you forget. That happens sometimes. Yeah, and also do keep in mind that you have to declare targets. So if they DD Crow, you do lose less life points, but obviously you have less stuff. So like if you are in a matchup where the opponent might have sided in Crows, it might be a good idea to try to bring out one more card than necessary to play around the Crow, especially if you don't need any effects of things you summon. You just need bodies. Yeah. Yeah, it also makes a lot of makes a lot of jank decks kind of playable, which is always fun. Like Fables, the deck can deep draw into Soul Charge and then make Quasar plays sometimes, or just play these plus Sparks Vanities, kind of degenerate stuff. You can make a lot of jank work with it. There's decks like Gadgets that set up big Soul Charge plays, and then have like a lot of effects of it. I think I probably said everything I need to say about Soul Charge. I'm sure I forgot something, but that's fine. Finally, we have Breakthrough Skill. The main reason why this card is the most popular trap in the format is artifacts. This card counters the shit out of artifacts. Besides that, it's also a bit of a staple, kinda. It's one of the most commonly run traps in non-control decks, especially in Mermels, because it's one of the best ways to out Dweller. It's only one of the only ways, really, to out Dweller. Um, it's also very strong versus stuff like Felgrand and Pleiades. The two big boss monsters of the format. You always have to be mindful of them. And these guys kind of just counter them. Also counter stuff like kind of Tiras, Durandal, strong versus Durandal. Though you have to be careful to always consider what the opponent might have if you're facing like a Pleiades or a Durandal, and you have Breakthrough Skilling Grade, because like they might just try to bait you and then have an artifact. So always be mindful of that. Yeah, pretty much. Artifact trap tricks decks always run a couple. Georgias usually run a couple, even 3 sometimes, even when they are already running Finish Chain. Because, well, Finish Chain still has the niche of protecting your monster, but Breakthrough Skill is better at protecting monsters from the effects. Then, obviously Mermail runs it mainly for freaking Dollar. Infernity doesn't run it. Then we have Mythic Rulers, which sometimes run it, sometimes not, because they have skill drain, Spellbooks don't usually run it because they want stuff that protects them. So Fiendish Chain and even Troptrix Trample Nightmare is better for that deck. But that's a bit of an exception, as always. Spellbook is always the exception. It's always the odd deck out of the format, pretty much. But yeah, you kind of definitely want it versus... you want it in any deck that's weak to artifacts, pretty much. But kind of depends. Well, we'll get there when we get there, when we can talk about more anti-artifact stuff. Anything else I have to say? Obviously, it's good in mill decks, stuff like Lightstone Rulers. You probably want to run a couple of Breakthrough Skills, especially since those decks often have are weak to Dweller. So often there's decks like Lightsworn Artifact Trap Tricks, which don't really care about Dweller much, besides for when you pop the artifacts. I think I'm done. I'm gonna think about a second. I'm gonna come back to you in a second. Yeah, no, that's about it from me. Just maybe if you like main deck a couple, you might want to consider siding the third one. Maybe. Depends on what your deck is. Like, I would consider it in Artifact Trap Tricks decks. But yeah, that's it from me about the 3 most important cards of the format, the three biggest staples. Breakthrough isn't really the most important card in the format because it's such a staple because of other cards. Artifacts, I would say, are more important, but they are not as played as these cards because these cards are completely generic. So, like, yeah, this is my in-depth discussion about the most played cards in the format. So yeah, give me your thoughts in the comments. Join the Discord, both of them. Subscribe, leave a like, and yeah, that's it from me. Goodbye.